the nation's seat of power. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the staff on duty gathers the day's newspapers from the presses of the country's major publications. The selected news articles, features, and opinion columns are arranged and coded. In a separate building, draft speeches, cabinet reports, national project updates, and other documents are collected. At 4 in the morning, folders are sent to President Fidel Valdez Ramos at his official residence across the street from the palace compound. Not a minute is wasted at the start of the president's day. In between his regular exercises, the president goes over the papers. He writes his marginal notes on those that merit a response or immediate action. All the documents are color-coded for efficiency. Color codes are just a small detail of a whole work system that has been developed to make full, efficient use of the president's time. In fact, even the sign pen used by the president is selected for efficiency. At 7 in the morning, the president arrives at the palace, continuing the business of government. For work has gone on inside the car. The car is a Malacañang office in miniature. The president steps out of the vehicle, an important part of the whole day's work is already done.
To this work of empowering the people, I dedicate my presidency.
Today I have returned as the president of a free people.
I am profoundly conscious of the tasks that remain.
Fight past poverty and strengthen and maturize democracy.
Of course, our Constitution is the cornerstone of our freedom. I would rather inspire respect than impose it.
Almost 100 years ago, the first Philippine president entered Malacañang not as head of state, but as prisoner of a colonial power. The Filipino-American War that raged for 2 years at the turn of the century came to an end with the capture of President Emilio Aguinaldo on March 23, 1901. From his mountain hideout in Palanan, Isabela, the first president of the Philippine Republic was forced to board the USS Vicksburg and brought to Malacañang. There he was received cordially by General Arthur MacArthur, then military governor of the newly colonized islands. Captive Filipino leader meets foreign ruler in a palace that, many years later, would become the home of Philippine presidents. But at the time, Malacañang was just the temporary residence of the American military governor. Aguinaldo was kept in seclusion under heavy guard within the palace walls. On April 1st, 1901, he had no choice but to take his oath of allegiance to the United States. It was only on April 19, after issuing a signed proclamation ending hostilities with the Americans, that Aguinaldo was allowed to leave the palace a free man. Although he never held office in Malacañang, Aguinaldo left a legacy that survives today in the palace. Aside from creating the original design of the Philippine flag, Aguinaldo was also responsible for the design of the presidential seal. Over the years, the official seal of the president has undergone changes, but it retains some of the features of Aguinaldo's original. Malacañang Palace stands in the middle of a sprawling 10 hectares of land by the Pasig River. Surrounding the palace are some 12 buildings and a number of structures. Beside the palace is the Kalayaan Hall, where the President's press secretary holds office. West of the palace is the premier guest house, where the office of the First Lady is located.
How's my schedule today?
East of the palace is the Mabini Hall, where the executive secretary holds the fort for presidential affairs. With its floor area of 9,931 square meters, the palace itself has 70 rooms and 40 toilets and bathrooms. Malacañang is not like the White House, which was built by an American president to be the first family's home. Like England's Buckingham Palace, which was purchased by a king for the royal residence. The palace is older than the Philippine Republic. It is a landmark we inherited from the colonial past. But like many of the things in our culture, we have claimed it as our very own, improved on it, made it meaningful by giving it the imprint of our character as a people. The palace today is a result of the many renovations made by its former occupants over a period of more than 100 years. In the late 1700s, Malacañang was a leisure villa of a Spanish gentleman named Don Luis Rocha. In 1802, Rocha sold the villa to Don José Formento, a colonel in the Spanish army. In 1825, the Spanish government took an interest in the villa and bought it from Señor Formento for 5,100 pesos, turning it into a summer residence for the Spanish governors general. When the place was just untamed grove, the natives considered it the dwelling place of mighty beings. They would tiptoe past the grove and whisper, "Nilakan nilakan." The phrase means full of mighty beings, or where the noble are. In the course of time, Nilakan became Malacañang. It took a catastrophe to change the course of history for the place of mighty beings. For the most part of the country's 3 centuries under Spanish rule, the seat of power was located within the walls of Intramuros, specifically the Palacio del Gobernador, which was the official residence of the Spanish governors general. But in 1863, a violent earthquake jolted Manila. It lasted a minute, but left a swath of destruction in its wake, and a Palacio del Gobernador in ruins. The then Governor General Rafael Echagui was forced to move to the Malacañang Villa. He thought the villa was just going to be a temporary home. It was not to be. The transfer to the villa following the devastation was marked by a blessed event. The Countess gave birth to a daughter, the first birth in the history of Malacañang. The birth of a child within the palace walls would be repeated 54 years later, in 1917, when Governor General Francis Burton Harrison's teenage wife, Elizabeth Wentmore, gave birth to a son. And that was not to be the last fortuitous event in the palace. Many years later, in different eras, Malacañang would be the site of auspicious occasions. In 1950, just after the war, the country witnessed the first wedding in the palace. Victoria Quirino tied the knot with then Ambassador Luis Gonzalez. The daughter of widower President Elpidio Quirino, Vicky Quirino was also, at the time, the country's first lady. She was only 16 years old. During her stay in Malacañang, she gave birth to 2 sons, who were both baptized in the palace. In 1993, another wedding took place in Malacañang for another president's daughter. On the palace grounds, President Fidel Ramos's daughter, Josephine, exchanged vows with film actor Lloyd Sammartino. It was the first ecumenical wedding solemnized in Malacañang, and also the first wedding ceremony in the palace to be extensively covered by television.
When Joe decided to get married, she chose Malacañang Gardens to be where her wedding would be. And I thought it was a very nice choice. My assignment was to take care of the flowers. I feel that Malacañang is the seat of government, and being a military wife, I'm used to moving from one place to another. And although so many interesting things have happened here in Malacañang, I realized that it is temporary and look forward to the next destination.
At the time it was used by Governor General Echagüe, Malacañang was not what one would call a palace fit for a head of state. The lower floor of wood was close to the river and poorly elevated. There were no windows for good lighting, proper ventilation on the ground floor. Troubles besetting Spain delayed the release of funds from the Spanish crown for the reconstruction of the Palacio del Gobernador. With the rise and fall of each regime in Madrid, hopes for the reconstruction of the Palacio fluctuated. For 3 decades, Echagüe and the 17 other governors general who succeeded him were left with no choice but to use Malacañang as their official home. By the time the foundations for a new Palacio del Gobernador had finally been laid in 1899, the Americans were already in Manila to colonize the Philippines. They needed a command center. They found it in Malacañang. The center of power in Malacañang is the President's office, located at the 2nd floor of the palace. With his hands-on type of leadership, President Ramos also maintains an office in the nearby executive building, where he can be immediately in touch with the various departments and support staff. In the palace, state-of-the-art computerized communication systems provide immediate link-ups between the President and offices in the country and all over the world at the touch of a button. During the Marcos administration, however, the executive building was the Kalayaan Hall next to the palace. It was then called the Maharlika Hall.
Of the praise of power and authority in this democratic.
The Kalayaan Hall was built during the time of Governor General Leonard Wood. A major improvement made by the Americans had to do with addressing the problem of flooding of the palace. In 1901, Governor General Howard Taft elevated the palace grounds by 18 inches. It His wife, Helen, described Malacañang at the time in her memoirs.
Malacañang is old and rather damp. In my time, some of it had not been furnished or finished according to modern ideas, but in size and dignity, it leaves nothing to be desired. The great living rooms open one into another, giving a fine perspective, and they lead to a dozen different doorways onto a whitened veranda, which runs out to the bank of the Pasig River. There's a picturesque, moss-covered river landing on the veranda below.
The palace area was enlarged by the purchase of 17,601 square meters of land, covering the area east of Malacañang. Despite Taft's measures, the flood problem in the palace persisted. Luis Quezon took over Malacañang in 1935 as Commonwealth President. He tackled the flood problem by reclaiming 15 feet of the Pasig River bank and building a concrete wall at the new boundary. By this time, Malacañang had gone through many renovations under the American Governors General in the span of 35 years from the turn of the century. From a palace of wood, it was now a stone edifice. Quezon also converted the ground floor bodega of the palace into a social hall. From his study, he ordered the construction of the ground floor chapel. The location of the chapel has changed a number of times since the Quezon era. Despite its relocation at each change of administration, the chapel has remained. And the succession of the first Philippine Protestant president did not spell the end of the chapel's existence in Malacañang. Is not without its myths and legends and stories of spooks and apparitions. It has been said that when General Dwight Eisenhower stayed in the palace as a guest, a butler came to his room one night to serve him a drink. It turned out there was no such butler in the palace, and the description of the mysterious man matched that of President Quezon's butler, who had long been dead. The palace grounds also have their share of stories about enchanted spirits. In Philippine folklore, the balete tree is known to be the dwelling place of the capre. The one across the main entrance has its own tale of mystery about an elemental called Mr. Brown.
After my husband became president, of course I took a look at the garden here, and being interested in plants, I thought we needed to add more plants, improve the garden. And since there was no budget, I decided we will start with this beautiful tree, this balete tree. The trunk was empty, so what we did with a friend of mine was to add more plants in the trunk. And after a week, I came back, and the tree had no leaves. And somebody said, "Did you ask permission from Mr. Brown?" And I said, "Who's Mr. Brown?" "Oh, he's the one that lives up in the tree." So when I passed by the tree, I said, what can I lose? I said, Mr. Brown, we're just trying to improve the looks of your trunk. And a week after, I was surprised. The leaves started to grow out. And so I said, maybe there is really a Mr. Brown, only to find out that this tree really sheds its leaves.
Likewise, according to some accounts, the ghost of President Carlos P. Garcia has been seen playing at his favorite chessboard at the Garcia room of the Palace Museum. Up to now, mysterious sounds are still heard. Footfalls echoing down the hallowed hallways, inexplicable knockings of doors, the squeaking of floorboards in empty rooms, sounds that are perhaps stubborn reminders of the past that refuses to